lecture, we're going to be talking about Mendel's 3 important laws. So when we're talking about the results of a monohybrid cross, we see that inheritable genes are responsible for all the heritable characteristics. Characteristics, remember, heritable characteristics are characteristics which can be inherited from our parents. Phenotype, remember, is based on genotype, so you look like you do because of your genes. And remember, this is very important, that each trait is based on 2 genes, one from the mother and one from the father. So true breeding individuals are often homozygous, or in other words, where both alleles are the same. Mendel's first law is the law of dominance, and we've already seen some of this with the monohybrid crosses that we've been doing, but we need to now get something down in terms of the text that we want to use for exams and test purposes. So if we cross parents that are pure for contrasting traits, all right? So remember, when we say pure, we mean homozygous. Only one form of that trait will appear in the F1 generation, or the next generation. So in other words, all of the offspring will be heterozygous, and they will be expressed as the dominant trait. Now you all saw this when we were having a look at the seed traits, especially the round versus wrinkled seeds. Remember, if we had a homozygous dominant and a homozygous recessive, we would get all heterozygous individuals, but these would all show that they had round seeds, so they will only express the dominant trait. So that was the first law that Mendel came up with, the law of dominance, right? So let's have a look at this again, or a little bit further. Remember that the law of dominance tells us that the dominant gene will be expressed and the genotype will then be heterozygous, or all the same. But phenotypes, so the way you look, is the classic 3:1 ratio, where 75% of the offspring will have yellow seeds, and 1, or 25%, will have green seed color. So remember, the 3 genotypes yield 2 phenotypes in this case because of the law of dominance. Now, Mendel's second law is the law of segregation, and this is very important, especially when we start dealing with additional traits. But this law tells us that when gametes are formed, so either eggs or sperm, the 2 alleles responsible for a trait separate from each other. And you should think about which process this happens in, and we have covered that already, so you should know how they separate during a very important process in the formation of gametes. Obviously, Mendel didn't know about this at the time, but it's a very important process. But remember, they separate to opposite sides of a particular cell, of the sex cell. But then, when fertilization occurs, these traits recombine, as it were, and produce the genotype for the offspring when they are recombined. So, let's have a look at what this would look like in humans. If we have a tall female parent and a tall male parent, okay, tall shown in in purple, and short shown in yellow, what we see is that they are both heterozygous tall. All right, tall is obviously the dominant, and they will then separate out, so they segregate, the gametes segregate at a ratio of 1:1. So 1 dominant, 1 recessive, 1 dominant, 1 recessive, and what we see is our classic 3:1 phenotypic ratio, and we discussed this in lectures a little while ago, but that's why if you have 2 short parents, you could end up with a tall offspring, because of the way that genes are carried and then recombined when fertilization takes place. But in this example, we would have 3 tall individuals and 1 short individual. So you've got to hope when you were conceived that you got the tall end of the stick and not the short one. Now, Mendel's second law was the law of independent assortment. And what this means is that alleles for different traits are distributed to the sex cells and the offspring independently of one another. So they mix. So that's what the assortment means, is that there is a mixing of alleles, and this law is probably best illustrated using dihybrid crosses, which is in the next lecture.